One of my favorite subjects, penalty abatement. You gotta love the penalties the IRS charges. You've got a failure to file penalty, 25%, 5% a month or fraction of a month up to 25%. Technically, it's 22.5% failure to file and 0.5% a month in other penalties, but call it 5% a month or fraction of a month. So you forgot to file an extension and you file your return late, April, May, June, July, August. By August, you have the 25% penalty. That's a big number, even on a small tax liability. So whatever the liability is, you've got that 5% a month penalty up to a maximum of 25%. You have the failure to pay penalty. It's a 0.5% a month up to a maximum of 25%. You have the failure to deposit payroll tax penalty. You have the trust fund recovery penalty. More on that later. And then, of course, you've got these huge accuracy-related penalties, 25% on audit if your tax liability is $5,000 or more as an individual, or $10,000 or more as a corporation. But then you have the more egregious penalties, the valuation misstatement penalty, transfer pricing adjustments penalty. We have intentional disregard of rules and regulations penalties. We have negligence penalties. These things are upwards of 50 to 80% of the tax due. They're very, very egregious penalties. And of course, we want strategies to abate them. We'll talk about a few of those strategies in a moment, but there's no way that we can drill down and give you every possible alternative to trying to abate these penalties. Let's talk about the first time penalty abatement, FTPA. Been around forever, and most people don't know it. What the FTPA, the first time penalty abatement, says is that if your taxpayer, if your client has been a good boy or girl for the last 3 years and has filed their returns on time and paid all the tax, by the way, even if the tax was paid late, you get an automatic first time penalty abatement, first time pass. So let's say that 2015, 16, and 17, your client files their return on time and pays the tax, simple example, and somehow the IRS doesn't get the 2018 return, so it's filed late. They owed $100,000 in tax. They have a $25,000 failure to file penalty. FTPA, first time penalty abatement. Now, what you should know about the FTPA is that you don't want to use that if you have reasonable cause. You want to save that free pass up. By the way, it doesn't apply to the state. The state is one big money grab, at least here in California. It's actually very, very difficult to deal with the state, as many of you know. But we're talking IRS today, and the FTPA is the one you save up for when you have no reasonable cause. The most generic, the easiest way to get out of a penalty is if you have reasonable cause. There's lots of examples of reasonable cause in the code and regs. You can type reasonable cause into the search box in the internet and get dozens of examples. Reliance on professional advice, for example, is reasonable cause. My CPA told me to do it. My EA told me to do it. Something like that. So I'm not sure I'd fall on the sword for my client, but if they relied on professional advice, maybe they had a lawyer send them an email, a CPA send them an email, and they prepared your return. Now they end up in your office because they have this big penalty for something or another. Reasonable cause, reliance on professional advice. Someone died. It's April 14th, and you're about to file your return, and someone in the immediate family dies. reasonable cause. Problem is, I've had clients that have had that happen and they haven't filed for 3 or 4 years. I said, well, that may fly for the 2014 tax year, but why didn't you file for 15, 16, and 17? I usually don't get an answer, although there could be one. You have all kinds of other reasonable cause, depression, alcoholism, drug addiction. There's lots of ways to roam here. If you can get the documentation, if you can get the visits to the doctor's notes, things like that, and you have a big enough penalty to where the prize is worth the price of trying to get the penalty abated, by all means, do it. So reliance on professional advice, death or illness of all types, even destruction of records could be reasonable cause, but that is a little tougher than some of the others. It kind of depends. So you have lots of options to abate penalties, but the best and easiest, the path of least resistance, is the first time penalty abatement, which, as I said, has been around forever, and many people don't even know about it. 3 years good standing, free pass the 4th year. Let's look at some of the small, medium, and large penalties we've had abated. Little one here for $3,300. Failure to file penalty, FTPA, abated. Now, we're going to go through a lot of information here today. And I'm sure that moving through this material quickly will end up raising a lot of questions that we don't have time to answer. We just won't have time to answer in the limited time we have available today. In fact, sometimes we run over a few minutes, although I'm going to try not to do that today because this time of the year, we're all on schedules. I hope that this doesn't frustrate you. I hope the speed that I go through this. In fact, I've expanded this to 2 hours so I can go a little slower. So I hope you don't get frustrated. After all, knowing enough to ask more meaningful questions is not a bad definition of what education is really about. If you know what you don't know, at least you'll be able to ask the question. The biggest fear I had when I was in my first dozen years or so in this business is not knowing what I didn't know. What did I miss? So, ask more meaningful questions and get educated.